Welcome to On Behalf of, where I, Dara Kalima, the community poet, chat with folks who speak on behalf of their respective communities. So I met this individual, oh my gosh, I guess in the spring, and I guess this episode will air in the fall. So a couple of months ago, maybe even 6 months ago, who's gonna do math? I'm not. But I met them on a panel, and we were told it was the best panel of the whole festival. They are the first person I'm interviewing from across the pond. So that's really dope. I'm really excited by this. They are such an interesting individual and they're into some cool stuff. So I'm really excited when they said that they wanted to be interviewed. And I'm glad that we finally got our timelines and schedules to line up. So I'm not even gonna say anything else. I'm just gonna ask them to say their name. So what's your name?
Hi, my name is Ella McLeod. And yes, I am across the pond, as you can probably tell from my accent. I'm a Londoner.
Yay. So what are your pronouns, Ella?
My pronouns are she, her.
Awesome. And tell us more about yourself.
Sure. So I'm a writer and a podcaster and a poet as well, like you, which is how we met doing poetry things. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here and talk about all of my weird and wonderful interests.
So are you from like downtown London or from a suburb of London? Or
I'm from,
I know anything about London.
Yeah, so I'm from, no, it's a good question. I'm from South London. I have a lot of South London loyalty. Okay. People, Londoners are all very like loyal to their parts of London, I feel. And yeah, I obviously think South London is the best. I was mostly raised in Southeast London, so that is where I am partial to and where I currently live. I have spent some time in Southwest London, but I personally think that, yeah, Southeast London, Peckham, Lewisham, that's where I'm from. Those are, in my opinion, the best parts of the city.
I love it. I love it. I've been to London, but I was just a tourist, so I wouldn't even know where I was.
Yeah, you see that this is the thing. Like, obviously, when you come and you're a tourist, you see the stuff that's in central London. But all the best bars and places to eat are in Southeast London. Like, I will fight anyone that disagrees. So.
Awesome. So I would. So wait, where's Brick Lane area? Where's that?
Brick Lane is east, so that's
okay.
Not too far from me. I'm southeast. It's east. It's actually, yeah, it's not far. Brick Lane is great. Brick Lane is really, really cool. After Southeast London, East London, I think is the next for overall vibe. Okay. But yeah, Northwest, nah. I have lots of friends from Northwest, and I'm always like, no, the vibes aren't it in Northwest London, guys.
Okay, so now I need to go back and go to Southeast. I definitely 100%. Love Brick Lane, but like in New York City, there's the area called the Village, and so everywhere I go, I look for the Village of wherever I'm at, and so that was like, oh, this is home. Like I loved all the stop signs with the way the art was on it. I was like, oh my goodness. This is where I need to be. This is home for me. So. Yeah,
East London, Shoreditch is definitely like the Village in New York. I would agree with you with that for sure. Yeah.
So, okay, great. So yeah, and so you've always been writing, you've always been
Yeah, well, I mean, yes and no. It's a weird one because I have always written and I have always loved writing, and I've always been a voracious reader, which is something we'll definitely get onto in this conversation. But I don't know, it never really occurred to me that I could be a writer. That like I guess I knew that it was a job that people had, but I never thought it would be a job that I could have. Not even necessarily because what I wanted to do was so much more attainable. I really wanted to be an actress for a long time, which is hard and unpleasant in lots of ways. But I guess growing up, I saw more Black actresses than I did Black women writers. And so I was like, well, I mean, being a Black actress isn't easy, but like, at least I can see people doing that. Whereas when I was younger, the only Black women that were writing, particularly for like young adult fiction, children's fiction, were like Mallory Blackman. And like, that was kind of it. So yes, I've always written, and I've always written prose and poetry, but it never seemed like a viable career option.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I grew up in theater, so that was like my trajectory.
Yeah, me too. I grew up in theater as well. Yeah.
So what communities do you represent or are you part of?
So definitely feel like a representative of the eldest child community, like the eldest sister community in particular. I have a younger sister, and then I have a lot of younger cousins, and we're all very close. So I'm kind of everyone's older sister. I take it very seriously. It's a big part of my identity. So I definitely, and they're always tagging me in like memes and TikToks of like, oh yeah, that one older sister that like thinks she runs the family. And I'm like, because I do run the family, because you are all lost without me. Like, just admit it, it's true. So definitely feel like I am part of that community. Definitely part of the blurred community. Like Black girl nerds are my people. Yeah, 100, like particularly, and this is like the space that I feel like I really like live and die in, is like fantasy literature, fantasy TV shows, fantasy films, everything from Lord of the Rings to Game of Thrones. I particularly especially like since I started writing professionally, have become part of the like young adult fantasy literature community, with a niche love for like the smutty stuff. Like the smuttier the better, in my opinion. So that's a real one for me. And then just any kind of like animal related, like pet loving, yeah, the like dog people, cat people. I'm like a secret horse girl. Like, yeah, so that also is a community that I feel very much a part of.
Wait, so do you have pets?
I do. I have a cat. You can see the giant
Yeah.
contraption in the background is my cat's cat tree. She's currently in a different room because she doesn't like it when I talk to people that aren't her. So she's not allowed in when I do podcasts. But I have a cat. My mum and dad have a dog who I'm obsessed with. His name is Simba. My cat is called Persephone, the Greek goddess of spring and the underworld, which really like sums up her character. She's like a little bit springtime and a little bit demon. So
I
it's
love it.
apt. Yeah. So yeah, animals. And I co-host a podcast called Comfort Creatures, which is basically where we get people on to just like talk about their obsessions with their pets, which is always really fun, because it means that what inevitably ends up happening is people talk about the ways in which they like project their own emotional instability onto their animals, which is like where the meat is, I think.
I have some people you need to be interviewing.
Oh my God, please send them my way.
I definitely will. And it's funny because I just got a text from, or I just got like a notification from one of my friends who has the most amazing dog and also the worst behaved dog in the world. Like, I love his dog, but also like I spent the night at his house because I was staying at his house before a wedding. And the dog is like this little tiny dog. Took up the entire bed. And like the next morning we realized how we could have done it differently so that I could have slept without sleeping with the dog. But like, and I'm not really a pet person, but I definitely had at one point, and it was a weighted blanket, and the dog slept in between my legs with the weighted blanket. I was like, there's no way I can move this little dog because the blanket is 20 pounds.
100%.
And this dog is like heavy. And I was like,
I mean, you can't move the dog anyway. Like, that's the rule. Like, I have back problems because of the positions I can talk myself into, so I don't disturb my cat when she's asleep. And like, I live with my partner, and he's like a strapping Irish lad, and the teeny tiny space he is forced to fold himself into so that the cat can have like 2/3 of the bed, like, is ridiculous.
This is amazing. Yeah. I'm definitely gonna put you in touch with this person because I think
Please.
this dog is so epic that
100%.
Yeah. So goodness, yeah. I just had like too much fun on that topic alone. Yeah. Okay. I gotta get this dog out of my head, and we gotta get back to this conversation.
Yeah. This is the thing. This is why we do a podcast with it, because like you can talk for hours about animals and like the ridiculous stuff they get up to. It's really enjoyable.
Yeah. And that dog is so epic. Like you two would have an amazing conversation. So
I bet.
Yeah,
this sounds great. Please do.
I will. I totally will. Oh my gosh, I can't even think of the next question because I'm still stuck in this conversation. Wow. All right. So there was something else you said in that same answer about your interest. And now my brain is not coming up with it. I'm like the worst host sometimes.
You've got COVID brain. It's very legit. The post-COVID brain I had for ages. I mentioned being a elder sister. That's a big part of my
Oh yeah.
identity.
Thank you for being an elder sister. I'm the baby.
Yeah, see, and you know the thing about being the older sister, right, is that like there's a Mother's Day, there's a Father's Day, there's a Grandparents' Day. Where's the oldest child day? Because I spend my money and my time and my effort on all of them, and there is no eldest child day. You know, everyone gets a birthday. I want a national, an international eldest sibling day, eldest sister day specifically, or like just not, because I feel like when you're an elder woman or like gender non-conforming person, the expectation that you like take everything on is greater than when you're an elder brother. I'm sorry, I don't care. It's true. It's just true. So that expectation that you're going to nurture and like be responsible and set an example.
My mom was the eldest sister, but she's not the eldest sibling, and she still took care of her older brothers.
And I know so many families where that is the case. So many families where that is the case. Yeah. 100%.
The girls are always put upon to like take care of the whole family. And my sister is no longer with us, but like I always called her mommy too, because she was, and I mean, there was a 10-year gap between the two of us. So she always was she was the negotiator of all problems in the house.
Yeah.
And she was always I was like, whenever I wanted to do something, she would broker the deal, you know?
Yeah,
and
totally.
if I needed a splinter taken out, she was so much more gentler than my mom taking a splinter out.
So yeah, the negotiating, the brokering of the deal is legit. Like if my sister wanted to go to a party or something, she'd come to me and be like, can you talk to mom and dad and like see if you can convince them?
Yes.
Or now, like, as I said, I've got like a lot of younger cousins, and the youngest kind of group of them are just starting, they're like preteens. The youngest of my cousins are 11. And so like if they misbehave or they're doing something, I'll get like a text or a call from an aunt being like, can you just talk to them and like level with them and like try and see what's going on there? And look, I moan about it, but obviously it's like, it's my reason for being. Like if anyone tried to take that responsibility away from me, I'd be like, no, that's not what I want the responsibility. I just also want the right to complain about having the responsibility.
And to be celebrated for that responsibility.
Exactly. And yeah, there's also a level of like pressure. Sometimes you feel like you have to set a good example and everything like that, as well as being nurturing and being the person that they all feel like they can come to if they ever need anything. So yeah, I take the role very seriously. It matters very much to me. But I love it. Like now, especially like I'm in my mid-20s. I don't live at home. I have my own place, and I can have them all over for dinner and like check in with them and stuff. So I do really, really love it. But it's when I see other older sisters talking about the burden of being an older sister, I'm like, I see you. I feel it.
Let's put it like this. I'm definitely significantly older than you, and I still appreciate you from the little
Thanks
sister.
so much.
Thank you for being the older sister.
Thanks. I really, really appreciate the
older sister energy. So I thank you for that.
Thanks.
So which community are we specifically talking about today?
So we're talking about, I guess it's the overlap of like Black girl nerds and then fantasy literature, because there's a delicious sweet spot in the middle there that I'm so passionate about, and like it's a great place to be, particularly at the moment. I think in the literally like the last 5 years, there's been such a kind of influx of amazing Black fantasy writers, Black women fantasy writers. And I feel like for a really long time, it was a cultural space that was dominated by like old white guys. And occasionally you would get someone that I suppose broke the mold, like Octavia Butler and Toni Morrison, who would write, amazing like magic realism and fantasy and sci-fi. But, and Octavia Butler is like a once in 100 years kind of writer. So, it's not like it happens every day. And also to even be given the opportunity to write in that space isn't something that happens very often. But it's really exciting to find that like there are more of us now, and the beautiful thing about like literature in particular is, you know, in other industries, if someone's doing what you do, that can often disadvantage you because someone says, oh, someone's already doing that. But like in literature, like that's not how it works. Like if a particular kind of book does really well, then publishers are like, great, we'll just publish loads of these because clearly they're doing really well. So, you know, Madeline Miller wrote A Song of Achilles and it did amazingly. And then now there are all these other great retellings of like Greek myths and things. So it's a really lovely community. But yeah, young adult fantasy fiction is my chef's kiss. It's everything. It's amazing.
So tell me more about the sweet spot, because I definitely know a little bit about it, but I will admit to not being as knowledgeable about all the names you've already dropped. I definitely know Octavia Butler. I've read all of her books, minus the one that's out of print because she didn't want it in print again, and so I won't even touch it. And the premise of it sounds terrible, so I acknowledge that I don't even want to try to get that book. And I love her. And I don't actually don't like reading the same author over and over again, because then I start knowing how they write. And that gets boring. But
fair
I
enough,
loved
actually.
her. Loved her. I loved her. So
yeah, she's amazing.
And and honestly, sci-fi is the only reason why I read it all. I mean, I read now because I have to read for other things and I want to like study the craft of writing and all of this stuff. But sci-fi is like, I'm a Star Trek person.
Sci-fi is your jam, right? Cool, got you.
So the only reason why I ever started reading in like high school or maybe a little younger was because I realized there were Star Trek books, and so I started reading Star Trek books.
Funny.
And then Quantum Leap was a show, and they're actually making a reboot of it. Apparently, it looked like there's a reboot coming out. I don't really know, but I feel like I saw a reboot that's supposed to happen. Either way, Quantum Leap was another show. So like there were Star Trek books and there were Quantum Leap books. And so I started reading those books. And that was the only reason why I started reading anything, because those books existed.
That's so great. That's so good that like that was the thing that hooked you. I'm like not a massive Trekkie at all. Maybe it's something I should get into. I've always been more fantasy side than sci-fi side.
That's still fun.
Which is and I think that maybe it's because I just love things that aren't real. I just love things that aren't real. And so the thing about sci-fi, like, and it sometimes it's done so well that it like it's fine. But when it gets really technical, I'm like, I don't understand. I wish I was smart enough to understand like how clever this person's being, and I'm not. I get that. Whereas with fantasy, it's magic, and like that anything can happen. Like anything can go with magic. But because of TikTok, and then as a result of that, BookTok, which like I wish BookTok had existed when I was a teenager, but because of BookTok, there's just become this like great little world of like, because I don't know, when I was growing up as well, like liking reading wasn't cool, liking fantasy wasn't cool, and with the exception of like maybe Twilight, it wasn't particularly mainstream, so which was fine. But it's so like great now that like there are all these ways of like pulling people into fantasy literature and pulling people into this world, and watching it unfold on like BookTok is like hugely exciting for me. So yeah, like the YA community, particularly like obviously like I'm in London, so it's like the England YA community. It's just great. Like people have got such incredible imaginations. People are telling such amazing stories. People are using kind of classic fantasy tropes in really like new and interesting and exciting ways. And like the thing that I'd always found frustrating about fantasy like of the past, was particularly fantasy written by old white men, is that these writers will invent whole language systems and whole subspecies and different continents, but like can't write their way out of patriarchy, and like can't, you know what I mean? Like there's always like some kind of sexual violence, and like there's always some kind of slavery, and like and the thing that always like drove me insane. And this isn't just men, I guess, because J.K. Rowling did it too, and I mean we know what she's like now, but like the end of these stories, you know, the good guy wins or the bad guy wins or whatever, but there's no like structural shift. Like everything kind of goes back to the status quo that was established at the beginning of the novel, and we're supposed to see that as a good thing. So in Harry Potter, for example, you've got this like not even really democratic, because it doesn't seem like the Minister for Magic is ever like elected. So you have this, I guess, like quasi democracy that everyone is sort of okay with, because for the most part there aren't any out and out fascists. And then an out and out fascist is able to come to power because it turns out that like the systems of power in place suck, and then the good guys defeat the fascist, and then the hero becomes a cop, and then everything goes back to how it was before. And like I just found it, like politics aside, so unimaginative, like just so deeply unimaginative, like so frustrating. But what's so exciting now is all these amazing younger fantasy writers are reinventing the wheel, and I find it to be so much fun. And whether that's someone like N.K. Jemisin or Tomi Adeyemi, who's like amazing series. I think the second book of her Children of Blood and Bone. Yeah, Children of Blood and Bone is out this year, and like it's being adapted into a film. Like they've done something so radically different with their storytelling, and like that's really exciting, particularly as they're writers of color. But also just like young women writers, like a friend of mine, Kat Delacourt, just published a book called With Fire in Their Blood, and it's this amazing like sexy gothic fantasy set in Italy, and she just has like all of the sort of tropes that we're used to in fantasy, with like all of the sort of romance tropes that we're used to in the sort of fantasy genre, which is like you know, brooding boy meets girl that's different to all the other girls, and he sees her and then they fall in love and then they overcome all the odds. She's just like, she just kind of tears it up and shuts it out the window, and like everybody is bisexual and everybody fancies everybody, and it's like the best chaos. And like that's like amazing. Like as the kid that grew up on Twilight, that is so cool to me, that like she took all the stuff about Twilight that we love, like the yearning and the brooding and the steaminess, and went, but everyone's bisexual, everyone fancies everyone, ha. And you're like, oh my god, yes, thank you so much, this is what I've been waiting for, this is so cool, you know. So it's I love it as a community, and I also love it at the moment as a community. I think it's like a really exciting time to be watching fantasy writers write. Yeah,
that's wow. I just got really excited for like, oh my gosh, it sounds amazing.
it's so cool, it's so cool.
That is wow. I guess I need to really tap into the things happening in this, right? Like there's so much writing to read.
There is so much writing to read. There are so many jokes on the internet, like, oh, she's a 10 but she'll never complete her to be read list. Like, oh yeah, she's a 10 but she'll be buried with all her books, because it's like never in my life am I going to read every book I want to read, you know.
I mean, if you knew how many books are on my desk next to me, a lot of them have been read, more have not.
Yeah, of course 100%.
Insane. But now I'm like, oh, I want to go get these books, and oh my gosh, now I'm like really excited for these books.
Good.
This is amazing. Like, so have you, like, since you've talked about the old white guys, have you been watching the new Lord of the Rings? Have you been having
I have
thoughts on it? Okay.
I've been watching the new Lord of the Rings, and I've been watching the new Game of Thrones. So I have issues with both and like both for different reasons. Lord of the Rings is like, it's so cinematically beautiful. Like I can't, like, just, it's so well executed in that way. And I find that like it's cool to see technology keeping up with fantasy literature and being able to like achieve the things that people are writing about, and I find that really, really exciting. At the same time, I haven't really been hooked by any particular character, and I'm not really like rooting for anybody yet, and I don't know if that's because of the pacing or if it's just the sort of style of speech that doesn't really engender like a great deal of empathy. I think that like I'm really enjoying, there are like little subplots that I'm enjoying. But yeah, I don't know. It just hasn't. I've got friends that are really obsessed with it, but it just hasn't caught me yet. Are you watching it?
I am watching it.
What are you thinking?
So what I said to someone yesterday, I was like, it's like all the books in one moment, which makes it hard. And
That is
I think
spot on. That is spot on.
so I think every
Yes.
book or every movie has like two main storylines that you're watching. So you're always jumping between these two moments. And in the show, you're jumping between, the elves, the dwarfs,
Yeah. The humans.
the humans and the little, and it's like there's always
Yeah.
you're jumping between so many stories that I'm just like, I don't know whose story I care about right now.
That's that's exactly what it is. I so agree with you. And so like
too many, like every movie at least was like these two moments, so you jump
yeah,
between these two moments and you could follow these two main stories. Now there's just too many stories happening simultaneously. I'm just like, I don't know who I care about.
totally. And like the second you start to care, then like you don't see that person for another like episode and a half.
Exactly. And just like,
Like,
wait, what's what who
yeah.
wait, who were they again? Oh yeah, that's who they are. So it's just like I get so turned around because I'm just like, what's that? What?
Yeah.
And admittedly, I'm not like watching it properly. Like I'm not sitting there, okay, I'm gonna watch this episode. I'm watching it in the background a little bit, so I'm half watching it, but it's not pulling enough attention to be like, wait, let me see what's happening now.
For sure. And I also think that's part of it, because like the fact that you even feel like the fact that you don't feel compelled to properly watch it, I think is also telling of the storytelling,
But it is beautiful.
It is
visually.
Beautiful. It is so visually beautiful. Are you watching the new Game of Thrones?
I've never watched any of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I kind of think that's good. I kind of think that's good. I do kind of think that, because like I'm sure you've seen the sort of like cultural fallout after the end of the first.
I've seen some of it, but I just for some reason that era doesn't do it for me, and it's not one that I'm just like, I gotta go. It's like it doesn't compel me ever.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. It's not like it is. It's so difficult to like to even try and like give it a fair critique, because my main big problem with it is that, at least at the moment, it's, I don't know how many episodes in we are, I've lost count, maybe five or six episodes in. It feels like the end game, because it's a prequel, it feels like the end game of the storyline that we're working towards is like the final season of Game of Thrones, which like most people think, and I agree, sucked. And so it's when they're talking about like the prophecies of what is to come, and the stakes don't feel high, because I'm like, oh, you're talking about that terrible conclusion to a series I invested like a decade in. Oh, okay. So even when there are brilliant moments of like writing and like character development, and like some of the dynamics between the characters are just so well played out. And I mean, you're a Doctor Who fan, so but like I would watch Matt Smith do anything, I would just watch him do anything. He's just fantastic on screen. Even then I'm like, oh, but like I know what the end game is, and it sucked. So it's hard to be fair, because, and it's not the same, it's HBO, but I don't think it's the same showrunners, and I don't know if I don't think it's the same writers in a lot of
probably not
for the most part. So it feels unfair, but I'm also like, but no, I'm so annoyed. Annoyed.
Yeah, that's fair. That is a fair assessment. I haven't seen anyone I know who was a big Game of Thrones person be like obsessing over this one.
Yeah.
So that is, and I knew people who were really obsessing over the show before. So that already says something.
It does, for sure. Yeah.
Because I knew a lot of people who were like big on it, and I just never got pulled in. I missed the
No.
window, and then I was like, it's too much. I
Yeah,
just
and
never.
it is getting involved that late in the game. It feels like a massive undertaking for sure. And then there are also just like questionable things about like the treatment of like the female characters and like the treatment of like women's naked bodies on screen, and like what do we owe to an audience when we're like when we're invoking a kind of conversation about this stuff. And then it comes back to the whole thing of like it's trying to represent the sexism of the time, and it's like, what do you mean of the time? It's fiction, it's fantasy. There is no time. This never happened. It's not real. There are dragons. Like, I don't understand. Like, why can you have dragons, but you can't like not have like sexual? I don't know. It just always really annoys
You mean
me.
like, why can't we have black hobbits? Like, I don't.
Like the F, like what? Like all of that was so wild to me. Like people just mad at good old Lenny Henry for being a hobbit. It's like, Sir Lenny can be a hobbit if Sir Lenny wants to be a hobbit. They're fiction. They're not real. What do you mean?
Just like everyone's mad about Ariel.
Little Mermaid. Yeah,
like, this doesn't even. Just the ways in which we get so upset. And like, I was just watching. I don't know if you had or if you've seen her. Amber. Oh gosh, why did I just lose her name out of my head? Amber. Oh my gosh, that's terrible. How did I do that? Amber, and I just watched it. Amber Ruffin. I knew I was saying her name wrong. So Amber Ruffin is a late night talk show host, sort of here. So she only does like short episodes because she's really a late night writer. And so she does like her own little short show, but she has this thing, How Did We Get Here? And so she did it on Little Mermaid. And in it, she was talking about, I think she even talked about The Hobbit real quick. I don't really remember. But in it, she had like little clips of people's reactions. And the one guy was like, you know what? We're going to do Roots and we're going to do it white. And we're just like.
But Roots actually happened. It actually happened. It actually.
It's based on real stuff.
It's based on real stuff. It's based on real stuff. And also, even if it wasn't, even if it was like a situation like, I don't know, because it's the same people that were mad that Hamilton had black people in it. You know what I mean? Like it's that same, and it's like, but do you not see how taking something that has always been one way and making it a different way is interesting, whereas taking something that has always been one way and just making it the same way is uninteresting? Like, can you not? No, like it just, yeah, it's hysterical. Like the reaction of the Little Mermaid, I just was like it's a mermaid, guys. It's a mermaid. Like there's a talking crab. I don't like. How is this upsetting you?
It is.
Yeah, it's been interesting.
It is amazing. But like, remember, people got mad at Hunger Games when they realized Rue was black, and I'm like, did you not read the book? Like,
truth.
Did you tell me you didn't read the book without telling me you didn't read the book? Because it's honestly very clear that she's black in the book. And
it is very clear that she's black in the book.
Did you just skip over that note as you read? You just envisioned her to look like you. Is that?
But and you know what? That is the reality, because a thing that's happened in the sort of like, the fantasy space that I found really interesting is, so I'm a big fan of a writer called Sarah J. Maas, and her most popular series is called A Court of Thorns and Roses, or like ACOTAR to the teens who know. And it's fantasy series. There are sexy fairy people and magic and battles, and it's great, and everyone's hot, and it's a good time. What has been really interesting is so the sort of structure of the world is that there are these different courts. So you've got the spring court, the winter court, the autumn court, the summer court, the night court, the dawn court, and the day court. And she doesn't like specify like white or black, because like those are constructs of race that like wouldn't exist in a fantasy world. Mm-hmm. But it's very clear, it's very, very, very clear that people from the winter court are kind of like Nordic looking. So yeah, sure, like Finland and like Scandi countries. And the people from the spring court, I would say, are probably like English or like Western Europeans. The people from the night court and like the adjoining state of Illyria read to basically everybody who's smart that I know who's read these books as like Middle Eastern or Arabic. The people from the the people from the Dawn Court read as maybe like Hispanic or Latin, and the people from the Summer Court and the Day Court are 100% Black people. Like just so obviously that it's just so obvious. Like I think even one of them has dreads. Like it's so obvious. Tell me why all of the fan art is of like a tan white guy. Because, and that's what's so interesting, is that like it's so fascinating the way we read things based on our own experience. Because if I hear someone being described as dark-skinned, brown-skinned, brown, anytime after maybe like Regency England, like Regency era writing, so maybe not Wuthering Heights, because even though there is an argument for like Heathcliff to be read as a Black man, but like I especially given that he was from Liverpool and it's a port town and there was a lot of Black merchants in Liverpool and blah blah blah, but yeah, okay, I can see how some people would say that Heathcliff was like a dark-haired tanned looking white guy. Fine. Any time beyond that era, if you're telling me someone is brown or dark-skinned, they're a Black person, right? They're of Afro-Caribbean heritage. That's how they look. If we're going to fan cast someone, you're casting a Black actor. But it's so interesting the way that like the fan art doesn't reflect that when it's obviously fan art that's been like created and drawn by white creators. And it's just, yeah, it's just genuinely fascinating to me. And obviously like it follows on from a culture of a lot of characters just being consistently whitewashed in stories that are both based on like fiction books and non-fiction books. Like in Walk the Line, Jennifer Goodwin played Johnny Cash's first wife, and like Johnny Cash's first wife was a biracial woman, and like everyone just is like, whoops, whoopsie, forgot that one. But it's so interesting because the people that make that fan art do not get anywhere near the kind of like criticism or condemnation that they would if, for example, someone did fan art of like the very obvious like white female protagonist as a Black woman. Like then everyone would be like, political correctness gone wrong. Yeah, exactly. But like it doesn't work both ways, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. It is, yes. It is so fascinating the way but the way the way that all works. It is so, I mean, because I just think about like the way one of my friends who's a artist, when he does art, I think about some of the feedback that comes with like when he's drawing women and all that. I just think about the things that I've seen or said about like when he may do the Black version of a character versus the white version of a character, and some of the feedback that comes with that. And yeah, exactly. That is absolutely there. Or even the way people are even responding to She-Hulk now, where they didn't read it's so interesting to see people got so upset that She-Hulk was twerking. And people like, have you not read the comic book? And I didn't read the comic book before, but like it didn't bother me that She-Hulk was twerking. She was twerking. Like She-Hulk is just like this random character that does random stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, go read the comic book. That's so within her character. But all these people were like, this is terrible. Now we have her twerking. How dare she be such a type of character? And people were like, go read the original the original comic books. This woman was skinny dipping. Twerking is nothing.
Yeah, totally. It's also just like when in all kind of like literature and stuff, when like whiteness is assumed, I always find that really interesting. Like the way that like just this idea of something as a norm, and even within my own writing, like it's just really fascinating the way that like nobody ever looks at a book with a white protagonist or looks at a fantasy series that basically like uses like medieval slavery as an aesthetic. No one ever looks at that and says, in the mainstream anyway, and says, oh, this is a series just for white people, or this is a book just for white people. But like, if you write a book with like a Black woman on the cover, or you write a book where Black people aren't oppressed or are actively fighting oppression, suddenly it's like it's a book for Black people. And I'm like, no one ever turned around to me and was like, oh, Hamlet is it for everyone? It's like it's taught as like a core part of the English curriculum. Like it's just it's so weird. Or Harry Potter, like there's like 2 Black characters and like a couple of Asian characters, but nobody ever was like, oh, like it was never the marketing surrounding it was never like it was for a niche group. And so what I hope for with like fantasy in particular is that like is that it continues to like break down these ideas of like who a certain genre is for, because like you can have a fantasy series with, because it's also about like reading yourself in a story, right? Like people, I found it really interesting because like I've written a book and it came out a couple months ago, and most of my characters are Black and my protagonist is Black. She's a Black woman, Black girl, and a lot of my book is written in the second person. And I did that to be like deliberately confronting, because I spent all of my friends, and this is what's really funny, is like all my white friends would say to me like, oh, but yeah, like I know it says that the main character has like light brown hair, and I know that I have dark brown hair, but I still just picture myself. And I'm like, that's so funny, because I literally like could not picture myself as Bella Swan. Like I literally could, like it's so impossible, it's so anathema, like because she's so not representative of me or my experience or what I look like or anything. So it's interesting that your experience of reading is that you can read yourself in a text quite often, and most of the books I read in my life I've not been able to do that with. And so I wrote my book in the second person to be kind of deliberately confronting, so that like, you know, just to force people to like use their imagination more radically, but also to like radically challenge what a protagonist is and like what it means to see a story from a particular perspective. And that was the feedback I got, and I was kind of happy about it. I was happy when my like a white male friend turned around and was like, oh yeah, it was really confronting when the text is saying, you know, you braided your hair, and I'm thinking I definitely didn't. And like I'm like, well, yeah, that feeling of the world is telling me that this is the normal experience, but this is not my experience, is like is what it is to be like a Black person in the world, or what it is to be like any kind of minority. But it is just really interesting the way that like what always being able to read a book and see yourself as the protagonist like does to your whole sense of self as an individual in society. And then even when you're reading a fantasy book and the protagonist you're reading about is like a vampire or a dragon rider, like you can still see yourself there, because there are certain things being drawn upon that are signifiers of like your own experience. And so like what my kind of wish for the future of like young adult fantasy, and what I think is starting to happen, is that like writers are engaging with that more directly, and therefore readers are being forced to be like, okay, well, I as a white person, or I as a man, or I as a cis person don't see myself reflected as protagonist, but I see myself reflected in the pain that they experience in this moment, or I see myself reflected in the stress or in the love or in the laughter, and I'm still like drawn in by the fighting and the dragons and the fairies and the magic. And like that's exciting, because that then takes us back to what I believe is like at the heart of reading and imagination in general, which is just like forcing people to like empathize and like really see the world from someone else's point of view. And I hope that like, and I think fantasy really has like the scope to really do that. And so, but like, it's important that everyone like keeps pushing those boundaries in that way. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
No, yeah. I like, as I'm listening to you, it made me think of Lilith's Brood by Octavia Butler.
Yes.
And
Yes. Yeah.
You know, I quoted that book for a very long time in a religious way. And, you know, Octavia Butler was not very religious.
Yeah.
But she also was she was weirdly religious. She wasn't religious, but she always had some
She was like
religious connotation in her stuff.
yeah, she was like spiritual, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always like, but like I saw myself in this character for some reason in Lilith, who had to like had to create this whole new world, and was a cancer survivor weirdly, or had the gene for cancer in her family, and just all of these things about this character and her struggle to find a mate and to finally be mated with this person, but having to go through this intercessory alien. But like I always saw that as like God, you know, like
Yeah,
having
yeah, yeah,
God
yeah,
be the
yeah.
bond between these two people to
Yeah.
be able to, you know, so
That's
like
fascinating.
I
Yeah.
had like this whole like tie to that character more so than maybe her other books. But I also loved Fledgling. And I think Fledgling is the best book for
Mm,
her to have died on. I'm mad that it was her last
mm,
book because I wish
mm,
she had more. I wanted to know more about Fledgling. I like wanted a series of books after that. But
mm-hmm,
Fledgling was also such a great book that I'm
mm-hmm.
glad that that's her last book.
She went out on a high with that for sure.
Exactly.
For
Like
sure.
Fledgling was like, man, this is like one of her best books. I love it. I'm
Yeah.
sad she's gone. But like, yes, Fledgling. So like I think there's something I think those are the books that I may have somehow seen myself. I don't know that I really saw myself in them, but I could like relate to the
Mm-hmm.
character because they were Black, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think the reason why I actually hated Wild Seed was maybe because I connected with the main character a little bit more than I wanted to. But I hated Wild Seed because it was such an abusive relationship. Like I could read the rest of the books,
Yeah.
but Wild Seed, I hate it because of
Yeah.
the violence in their relationship was so terrible that I was like,
Yeah.
I cannot do this book, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't help that the guy's name is Doro and I'm Dara. Like it just did not help at all, right? Our names were way too similar.
Oh, that
Um,
is too close to home. Yeah.
exactly. But like it was, but there is something about that representation. But so it's also interesting because I was also thinking about the Amber Ruffin episode that just released.
Mm,
The How Did We Get Here? That whole the How Did We Get Here section was all about empathy. And it was
interesting.
about the fact that because we do not see us on, not us, but because we are not portrayed on screens, white folks tend to not have empathy for us. So when they see us on screen, they do not have any type of recognition. Like it's like she was saying this, like seeing a blank screen. Like they have no empathy. Like there's
Mm,
no emotional connection to seeing us on screen. But then
mm,
hopefully the more they see it, or the more they see us, the more they get compelled to like actually have emotions towards seeing us on screen in a
mm-hmm.
possibly positive way. But the only reason why they'll start seeing us is if that another white person co-signs seeing it.
Yeah. God.
So it's sort of that whole like
Yeah.
we make noise for Black Panther, then they have to make noise for Black Panther because we said we made noise for Black Panther, and then they got to go support it, and then they'll be like, oh, this was actually really positive, you know,
Yeah.
like or any of the
Yeah.
other movies that like any of the movies that are out there or any of the things that are out there where they start seeing us and they have to start seeing our writing as something worthy of seeing. But this is the whole reason
Totally.
why like there's the reason why I get frustrated and I support the writing, but like even with so I read a lot of poetry right now. I read a lot of when I am reading because I'm not always. When I am reading, I also read like a lot of sociology books
Mm,
because I'm trying to make sure I have a right pulse on like this whole Black Lives Matter-ish type of Black history type stuff.
mm-hmm.
So I just read Nice Racism by Robin DiAngelo. She's the person who wrote White Fragility.
Yes. I've
And
read White
so
Fragility. I've not read Nice Racism. That's it.
so,
Okay,
so
cool. I
Nice
will read
Racism
that.
is her part is like her part two. And it's
Cool.
so delicious. I
Oh,
love it.
yeah?
I love it so much.
Okay,
I
cool.
love it so much. It's so much better than White Fragility. It's so much
Oh,
better, in my
okay.
opinion.
Cool.
But it's like I was like I was trying to figure out could people just read that and skip the first one? You have to read the first one, but it's so much like I think when she hands people their butts so well, but it's
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think it's a little more dense in context, which is why you have to read the first one sort of as a primer. But I think it's there's she just I think where there's some things that she misses the ball on a little bit or she messes up a little bit in White Fragility, she does I think this is like she don't miss a beat on this one.
Okay, cool.
So but in reading like we need the Robin DiAngelos because people are afraid of reading the Black book. So people are not going to go read White Rage because they're not ready to hear a Black woman, which is Carol Anderson, break down the history of
Mm,
white response to Black progress, which is that's all that book is. It's
mm,
an American book, but it's Carol Anderson breaks down from the moment of slavery to somewhere like right as Obama gets elected, but it's not really deeply in current events, but
mm.
it's the history of all the policies here in the United States in which progressive policies happened and the white response to it. So like,
Wow.
yeah, we in slavery, but here's the other legislations that happened right behind that
Yeah.
against that. Or,
Yeah.
we desegregate schools, but you know what? All of these states actually did not desegregate for another 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
So like that's
Um,
those things. So people are not ready for that truth. They're not ready. So you want to talk about race by Black folks. So you still need the D'Angelos because you need the white people still co-signing this stuff because they're not ready for us.
mhm,
So
mhm, mhm.
I think it's all of that. It's all this like lack of empathy from hearing from us because they don't have access to us. They don't know us. There's nothing sympathetic in their world. So, and even still, even as they read our stuff, they see themselves.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how narcissistic that is. You
Yeah.
only see yourself when you hear characters who have woolly hair,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, like what I love this is woman on I guess she's on TikTok too, but she also puts it on Instagram. Clarabelle Talks is her Instagram handle. And I think it's also probably her Instagram, but I'm not on I think that's also her TikTok. I'm not on TikTok at all. But
Mhm.
I see her on Instagram and she does all these like she flips the narrative always. And so she has this one video, she goes, "Oh, so she's like, oh, that's me." And she's pretending to be Jesus and she's looking at the portrait they made of her, of Jesus. And she's like, "So that's me? What happened to my, you sure that's me?" And she's like she's a very fair-skinned
That's
Black
so
woman, but she's
funny.
like, that's you sure that's
That's so funny.
that's how they that's what you see? You know? And
Yeah.
it's hilarious because it's like, what happened to the woolly hair in this description?
I know.
you know, None of those things are actually, why do I have blue eyes? Like, I don't understand
Yeah.
what's happening in this, you know. And so I think there's a lack of again, they don't have, until they get forced to keep reading our stuff, until kindred is part of your 101 reading, just like any of the other books we've had, like just like Bell Jar has to be read. Let's also
Mhm.
read Kindred. Let's read these other things that are out there. And like I think Kindred is
Mhm.
actually on our banned books list here in the States now. Yeah, yeah. Because we're banning books all over here now. Um,
What?
yeah. I'm pretty sure Kindred's on the banned book list.
I mean,
Um,
I don't even about even. I mean, I'm sure there is a banned book list here as well, but like I've just never even.
the
That's
color,
wild.
the color purple, beloved.
It's on the
Um,
banned book list.
yeah,
What does that mean? That you can't teach it?
in a lot of places, yeah. To Kill a Mockingbird. Um, yeah,
The color purple is on the banned book list?
yes. A Brave New World. That's crazy. I mean, that makes sense,
That's
but I love A
great.
Brave New
I
World.
love Brave New World. But
Uh,
yeah, it does make sense if you're gonna ban.
it does make
Wow.
sense. Their eyes are watching God, you know, Song of Solomon. I
Oh
don't think I
God,
ever
all the
finished Song of
books I
Solomon.
tell
Yeah.
people to read are just on this banned book list.
Native Son, of course, makes sense. Yeah, all the books
Wow.
are on these lists. Um, yeah, because
That's
oh yeah,
terrifying.
yeah.
That's really scary.
So yeah, because they're just, they don't want us to teach things right now, and they don't want them to learn these things. Um, yeah. So like as
That's
we try to get
crazy.
these things to these, as we have to keep telling these stories, and we have to subversively tell these stories and get them, and maybe keep, and then make the movies and see if we actually put the right face on them.
Oh, I
Because
know.
again, I mean, I'm glad that Little Mermaid is Black, not because I care, but because there's more faces and more people
Yeah.
that seeing the little children be excited to
That's been
see.
so wonderful. That's been the
Yeah.
thing for me that feels like not a win, but it's not a loss, like just seeing kids being like, because that's the other thing as well that like, you know, um, I love fairy tales. I've always loved fairy tales. My book is a fairy tale retelling, and I'm so interested in the ways that those stories that were told when we're really young impact the way that we model the world around us, the way that we play out our relationships. And there's something really fundamental about growing up, seeing the princesses who get like a romantic happily ever after look one way, and then looking at yourself and not seeing that, and then believing that like as a result of that, like as a direct result of that, that you therefore are like not worthy of love, like that no one would be romantically interested in you because you don't look
Mhm.
like Cinderella, and so it is it is I do hope that like there are little girls now that will grow up who like this will be their Little Mermaid. This will be the one that they know and that they think of when they think of the Little Mermaid, because that's already happened with all the live action Disney films. Like my 11-year-old cousins didn't know until really recently that like there were original animated versions. Like they had no idea. And so like for lots of little girls, like when they think of a mermaid, they'll
Mhm.
think of like, that's just amazing to me that they'll think of Hallie. Like it's so cool. And it's so different to,
Yeah.
to the rest of us. um
So, because I realized I've not even asked like half of the questions that are actually the
oh
standard
my
ones.
god, please go, please ask me
So,
questions.
is there something beautiful about your community that you would like to share?
Oh my god, there's so many beautiful things about my community. I think I love just like the power of imagination. I think that's the thing. Like these, looking at like other young adult writers from minority groups who are able to just reshape entire worlds and entire
Mm.
systems in their minds. Like I that's beautiful. Yeah.
Mm. Is there a fun fact about your community you can share that you can think of?
Oh my god, a fun fact. Um, just looking at my bookshelf. Like, what is a fun fact about you guys? Tell me. A fun fact about oh well, I suppose like the fact that like even though like publishers often don't want to admit this, some publishers will admit this, but like book talk and like YA book talk really brought print media back from the brink of death. Like
Mm.
it really did. After book talk took off and there were like young Gen Zers posting about like the books that were kind of like trending, like Song of Achilles and Sarah J Maas and Tomi Adeyemi series, like all of that generated a spike in book sales that hadn't been seen
Mm.
since Harry Potter. And I think that's really cool.
That's
Like,
awesome.
yay, people are reading again. Like, that's great.
So, it's a question that popped in my head a little bit. Do you think because of the fact that, the writers are probably more marginalized, that marginalization of their life is what's influencing the writing that they're doing?
100%. Yeah, definitely.
Is it like,
100%.
you think it's like their way of fixing the problems or?
Yeah, I think so. And like, definitely for me, I right wrongs. I like to right wrongs.
Mm.
But I think there's a level of that that's definitely the case. My friend who wrote the book about the chaotic bisexuals in Gothic Italy grew up in a small Italian town where being bisexual was like incredibly taboo. And so she like wrote a small Italian town where like all of the protagonists are bisexual. Like I definitely think there's a level of there's definitely that. And like even the bigger, slightly older generation of like young adult women writers are writing just like really great like women protagonists. just really, you know, books that feel like even in so in Game of Thrones there was this female knight character, Brienne of Tarth, and she was such an anomaly because it was like the first time that there was like a knight that was a woman in like that most people had seen on mainstream fantasy. And in like now and like in like YA fantasy fiction, there are so many amazing like heroic warrior women. So yeah, I definitely think that's a huge part of it.
Awesome. So then, so what's the difference for you between writing your poetry and writing your stories?
They bleed into each other quite a lot, to be honest. I find poetry easier because I don't have to explain as much, which is nice. I think, but they come from the same place, and I think that often my poetry can be quite prosaic and often my prose can be quite poetic, and it really is just about what form is gonna like be the most honest. So yeah, and I kind of I use them for different things. Like I definitely use poetry because there's a lot of poetry in my book, and I use it a lot for the fairy tale stuff to really kind of tap into the sort of fairy tale tradition and then like flip it on its head and like mess with it. But when I'm writing like separate from like my books and stuff, when I'm writing like for me, or when I'm writing like stuff that's maybe more autobiographical, I write poetry because I feel like I can be more honest when I'm using like metaphor and simile and imagery without necessarily having to explain an incident or give context or whatever. I can just sort of say like this is the like the shiny moment from this event, or the shiny moment from this relationship or dynamic or incident, and like that's what I'm going to write about. And like it doesn't matter, you don't have to know where in my life it was or who I'm talking about, because hopefully if I've written it well, then it will shine for you regardless of what you know, and you'll be able to say like, oh, I get that feeling, or or like you will resonate with me writing a poem about a time, I don't know, someone broke up with me, but you'll look at that and be like, oh, this is like the time me and my sister had a fight or whatever. Like it's I enjoy being able to tap into that more. It's fun to do both. It's fun to move between the two, you know.
Awesome. So is there a fun fact about yourself you're willing to share?
Oh my God. I'm trying to think. What is a fun fact? Oh, okay. Yeah. Like I've read every Shakespeare play. That's always my good fun fact. I've read every Shakespeare play. Yeah. Every single one. Yeah.
Every single one.
Every single one. I love Shakespeare. Yeah. I've read
Which one's your favorite?
Antony and Cleopatra.
Why?
Because it's like, I love a romance always. I just always love it. I love a romance. But it takes all of the stuff about Romeo and Juliet that is like kind of like darkly funny. Like I kind of think of like I always have read Romeo and Juliet as it's sort of like a sadistic comedy, because you know, when you fall in love as a teenager, it does feel like life ending and earth shattering. But when your parents say you can't be together, the majority of teenagers fortunately don't then like kill themselves, like and you know what I mean, like you feel like you want to kill yourself at 14 when like you like someone you can't be with. But the fact that Shakespeare takes that to like the furthest extreme is kind of funny in a sick way, whereas like Antony and Cleopatra almost flips that. It's like quite serious, like they're both adults, they're both middle-aged, they've been around the block a few times, but when they're together they kind of become like Romeo and Juliet parodies, and like they become sort of silly teenagers in their relationship, even while they're waging wars on this global scale and like ruling empires. And I find Cleopatra such a compelling character. She's so hard to get right. I've seen I've seen so many actresses play Cleopatra, and only once have I seen someone approximate doing it justice, which was Josette Simons in 2016 at the RSC, and she was amazing. The Royal Shakespeare Company, she was amazing. But like, because Cleopatra is so like, she can be so inconsistent, and she can be so shallow and so frivolous, but also so heavy, and she's seen so much, and she has this whole reputation precedes her, and it's almost like she chooses what bits to play into at certain times, and I just think she's so wonderfully compelling and fascinating. And then also it has like one of my favorite male characters in any play, which is Ena Barbus, who's just this like really good friend. Like, he's just a really loyal friend, and he's so wonderfully written and like tragic in a way that very few of like Shakespeare's like kind of male secondary protagonists are. Yeah, I could talk about Antony Cleopatra all day. It's just it's so good. And then yeah, it has like the best death speech of any character, in my opinion. Like, Cleopatra, before she dies, says, "I am fire and air, and my other elements I give to baser life." And that's just like oh, that's so good. Like, I am fire and air, and my other elements I give to baser. Like, I can only that's so good, you know, it's so delicious. So yeah, definitely that one.
Okay, now I feel like I have to go read it. I feel like I
Yeah.
don't
Are
know.
you a Shakespeare
Well,
reader,
as
fan?
a
What's it?
theater major, I had
Yeah,
to read all the stuff. I was supposed to read most of the stuff. I totally just passed that class. Like,
fair.
my whole like degree was in jeopardy because of that class. It was risky. Because I hated the sonnets and I didn't like the professor, and so it was terrible.
Oh,
But and I still don't like sonnets, but like
fair enough.
I appreciate them more. I just don't. Ugh, not me.
Sure.
But like my favorite Shakespeare is King Lear, and I have
Brilliant.
directed it. It's like my last
Oh,
big directing show,
oh
and
my God, that's so cool.
it was. I just I've loved it. I've loved almost every iteration I've seen of it,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know why I don't know why I'm drawn to that show so much, but I think one of my favorite productions of it, I actually saw at my school, and I don't know what group came and did it, because I went to SUNY Purchase, which is a theater school, almost a performing arts school here.
Cool.
But they did it, and it was like a chessboard, like that was the whole set. There was nothing on the set, but it was just a chessboard. And so they just had the two different multicolored boards, squares on the floor, and I thought that was so brilliant to do it that way.
That's so clever.
And I set mine when I did it at a nursing home, because the theater company that I was at is always about making it contemporary, making it places in which
Yeah.
people could recognize.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
because it's all around elderly and how do we treat our elderly. I said, and then my grandmother was in a nursing home at that point too. So I set it around the inheritance being the nursing home inheritance sort of thing. And
Mm.
so him being struck by some version of dementia or clearly losing his mind. And so I I I just love that show. There's something
It's so
about
good. It's so good.
and it's something about like giving up, like he gave up his stuff too soon, but he
Mm-hmm.
also was losing it. But it's also like the
Mm-hmm.
daughters were so wretched, and then
Mm.
like who was the good daughter, and it's the whole way the family responds at the decline of someone. And that's such
Mm.
those family politics that always show up when someone's dying. So it's
So
all
good.
of that. Just
I
in
love have you watched Succession? Have you been watching
I
Succession?
haven't.
You absolutely have to watch Succession.
Okay.
It's so good. I think it's the writing, it feels a lot like King Lear to me, in that it's
Mm,
about this powerful media family, kind of like Rupert Murdoch energy.
mhm.
Um, and the dad is in decline. He's in his like he's played by, oh my God, who plays the dad? I cannot believe I've done the thing now where the name has just left my head, and he's like a huge Brian Cox plays the dad. Brian Cox, who's got a history of being an amazing Shakespearean actor, and I think may have played King Lear at some point. But Succession is like King Lear if like no one is Cordelia, and instead of a kingdom, they're fighting over their dad's like media empire. And just those amazing family politics where like the stakes are really high, but what it comes down to is like sibling resentment. Is and the language is quite Shakespearean, and the way it's shot feels so like theatrical. You absolutely have to watch it if King Lear is your favorite Shakespeare. It's brilliant.
I'll definitely look into that now, because I wrote it down. So I will look into that. Awesome. Thank you. So something, I mean, we sort of talked about it a little bit, but something that frustrates the state of your community.
Something that frustrates me, or something that frustrates the community in general, or
you, about the state of your community.
Oh God, I would say like Twitter, like young, like, yeah, like, and I think that I mean, this is just Twitter in general, isn't it? Like, it can be such a cesspit, but the flip side of YA and YA fantasy pushing for like inclusivity is also just like the swift rush of cancel culture, you know, and just like the way that and I think it's because it's a community that's made up of a lot of young people. The writers tend to be at the older end of the community, and then like the bulk of the community are made up by the readers who are teenagers, and they're learning about the world for the first time. And I have such empathy, because like I've done it, I've been there myself, where it suddenly dawns on you that like the world like is very unfair and very cruel, and that injustice is like everywhere you look, and you just want to like yell at everybody, which isn't like necessarily constructive and like isn't how you build a movement. But Twitter is actually a space where you kind of can yell at everybody. And like when I was in my teens, like Twitter wasn't really a thing, it was just becoming a thing. And so the moments where maybe I would have fallen into that, like I didn't have an avenue for it, so it, you know, it stayed in the group chat or in text to my friends, or, you know, sat in the library at lunchtime, whatever, like that's where we'd hash out those things, whereas now people are hashing them out on Twitter. And so it just sometimes feels like people in the YA community can be like needlessly vitriolic about, and it's not always like there are ways to call out people that aren't like an out and out condemnation of them that makes them like never want to write again. Like there are ways of sort of saying to people, have you considered this? And I understand that like sometimes you're so frustrated and so angry that like you don't want to, you feel too mad to formulate a response in that way. But I do think that it's important that we like think about like people's intentions, and like if a writer, and a good example is like for a very long time with J.K. Rowling, and I'm using J.K. Rowling as an example because I think she's quite like ubiquitous, like everyone knows like Harry Potter, the rise and fall, and everyone knows J.K. Rowling's a TERF. So for a very long time, J.K. Rowling was doing the sort of thing where she would like things, and people would go, did she mean to like that article that denies trans people the right to identify? You know what I mean? Like people and people like gave her the benefit of the doubt, and people gave her the benefit of the doubt for a very long time because she's J.K. Rowling. And I don't necessarily think they were wrong to do that. Obviously, then what happened was that we were all proved wrong, and actually she is just a TERF, and that's very sad and very painful for a lot of people. But I do still think it's important to like give people the benefit of the doubt, and like because I do think that like as a result of like Twitter and like that sort of like the way that you can just like pile on someone who maybe would be like called out for something in their writing, who'd be like willing to like address that thing and learn and move on, is like not even given the chance to do that, you know. And it comes from a place of like everyone, like I said, the bulk of the community being teenagers, and so they're all figuring out their politics and they're figuring out how they feel about these things, and they're very angry, and I get it because so am I. But I just think Twitter is such a bad place for those conversations. It's such a bad forum for productive, constructive conversation about anything. And so it can sometimes, it can just sometimes be a lot. And I've seen it happen sometimes where like, trying to think of an example. So for example, sometimes like chapters will get published. So an author will do like a little special release of a chapter before the whole book comes out. But then obviously that means that like the chapter can be taken out of context and people can misinterpret things. And then everyone jumps on Twitter and like yells at that author. And like the author can't even really go, but you need to read the rest of the book because
it's taken off too much.
Because it's taken off too much. And then the conversation's kind of ended before it even happened. So that's the thing that I find, I think it's frustrating sometimes. I miss Tumblr because I think Tumblr was the place where people like had those debates and hashed out those conversations and like figured out the way that they felt about like certain issues of like, because and Tumblr was good because just the nature of Twitter, you can like quote tweet people and stuff. So pile-ons happen quite quickly. Whereas with Tumblr, you could like have a conversation on a thread and then take away what you've learned and like marinate with it for a little while and then like go back. And like Twitter doesn't really allow for that. So yeah, I think that's a bit of a shame sometimes. I think we need to be better at just having conversations about the way that we feel about things that we read.
No, that's great. I'm on Twitter, but it moves too fast. So
it moves so fast.
And that is ultimately part of the problem. What you're saying is like, it just goes, it's, I'm a little old. So it reminds me so much of like an AOL chat room where just like, AOL chat rooms back in the day, if you were in the right chat room, it was just going like this and you would go hello and everything, your hello got lost in a matter of seconds because so many people were saying so many other things that you get lost in the conversation. And that's Twitter. So it moves so fast that you're just like, wait, what? Huh? What? Okay, I'm done. Like but like everyone could rip you apart and everything could be done before you even get to correct a statement because it just moves too fast. So I can see that. Yeah.
And I think that like, again, like, there's no like, I'm trying to like phrase this accurately. I think it's really important that like when we're having conversations about like oppression or violence against certain communities, that we bring it back to like a material analysis of like what is happening. So, and that is almost impossible to do on Twitter because you're just so limited by like the number of characters that you have. So like trying to be like nuanced and specific and precise is like almost impossible. But when you're talking about books, it's vital because a writer writes, 90,000 words. How can you have a conversation about that in like 200 characters or whatever it is now, So that can be bad. And then also, and it's weird because it kind of a thing that happened like maybe was it last year, and I think this is like an example of that sort of was so Sarah J Maas's series is being adapted for TV, which is very, very exciting. Also like very terrifying because it's this precious thing and you want them to do it correctly. When you have rabid fans, that's the stakes are even higher because it sort of lives and dies with your rabid fans. And I feel like because of Twitter, people as much want to say this is the best thing ever as they want to have the hot take that says this is trash, no one watch it. So last year there was an incident where it was announced that it was being adapted, or maybe it was 2020 time. What is time?
Yeah.
It was announced that it was being adapted. And at that time, Sarah J. Maas followed a young actress on Twitter. And for no reason other than the fact that Sarah J. Maas had just started following her, and she kind of could look like the protagonist character Feyre in this series. And when I say kind of could look like, I mean like she was a white woman with blondie brown hair, which is like 90% of actresses. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's a bit of a reach, but the fans just piled on because supposedly this actress had a bigger body than Feyre is meant to have. And so they got really mad about it. I know. And it was just very ugly. It was just like a very ugly moment. And it's really funny because I think on one hand, the sort of YA community really wants to push for inclusivity. At the same time, the YA community like foam at the mouths if something doesn't feel like true to the book. And the frustrating thing is that the truth of the series is that Feyre's character starts off being impoverished and malnourished looking and ends not being impoverished and malnourished looking. So her body, like every woman's body, changes. And like it was just so ugly. It was so ugly. But it was also such a reach because like no one knew for sure if this girl was actually playing this character. She was just an actress who Sarah J. Maas had started following. We have no idea why she started following her. Maybe she is playing the protagonist. Maybe she's playing a different character. Maybe she's not in it at all. They met at a party. Who knows? But for her, she just suddenly got like a spate of abuse from like angry teenagers on Twitter. And it was just, so it's that's what I mean when I say like Twitter is the thing that I dislike about the YA community.
Yeah. I mean, I think just generally, I hear you, and I'm not gonna disagree with you at all. I think fandom is a problem. I think like because like even in the Trek world, like or not just Trek, but in Star Wars, like I will always be loyal to Trek, but I watch as much Star Wars as I watch Trek. I'm always gonna be Trek. The same and like same thing again, back going full circle back to Lord of the Rings, like the Black Hobbit, anytime you do the one thing, like Star Wars went up and went crazy this last time with the last show where you had the Black person who was the new cast member, like, and then Star Trek had to go, hey, we're here for it, for a totally different franchise, because and like these franchises are always warring in theory, but they had to sit here and be like, nah, we support you, because the fandom went nuts. But even in like there's history, there's historical proof that like there's two different types of people who love Star Trek, and the two different types of people who love Star Trek don't listen, because a lot of red people love Star Trek, and they have totally missed the leftist part of Star Trek. And they never got the whole, the whole world,
the memo
doesn't have the racist problems we have now. We don't have all these issues with ableism or any of that. And most of the like there's the original series had the whole black white episode, and they never got it. Like they just they love the white guy going through the world on this adventure, and that's what they loved, and they could not handle a black captain. And but even Star Trek, both the two black captains in the series weren't captains when they started in the show. Like there's always still this like, so they're the leads, but they never came in as captains. Like that's like kind of funny how that works, like. So even when they're being progressive, they're still also not being progressive. And even the first interracial kiss is a forced kiss on the show. It wasn't actually, a kiss by choice. Because if it was a kiss by choice, there'd be a whole other issue with the world,
God.
And the only reason why the kiss made it was actually because What's his face? Wow, why did I just do that? Captain Kirk would not, he kept screwing up the takes to make sure that the other takes would not work. So he crossed his eyes at every other take so that the take that they had to use was the one where he actually kissed Yehuda. They actually were
Oh,
trying to do
wow.
it where they didn't kiss. And he
That's
was
so
like,
cool.
every other take he messed up on purpose so that they had
That's
to use the
very
one
cool.
where they kissed, but
That's
like
very cool.
all of that, like it's still, but fans will take whatever part they want to take and rip apart
Mm-hmm.
the other parts. And I think
For
that's the
sure.
problem. They get so invested in the thing. And so
Mm-hmm.
like I talk to people who love Trek, and I love Trek. I love Trek so much that like I don't care what version of Trek you give me. I will tell you the
Mm-hmm.
shows that suck. I will tell
Mm-hmm.
you the movies that suck, because they're not all great. They're not all wins. But like I give me any of it and I'm happy. So like that's how much I love it. It doesn't matter what you give me. If it's Trek, I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
These other people are like, no, I only like this version. And like they're so diehard to the one
Yeah.
version of something that they can't even make space for the other stuff or the other realities within it. And I think that happens with any of the stuff, like whether you're reading the books, whether you're reading it, like any fandom you have. Like there's an author, Stephen Brust, that I love. And I love him because he's so sarcastic in his writing. And he's a fantasy writer, and he's like most of his stuff was old. The ones that I was reading was old. But I love it because partially you could pick up any book and it doesn't matter what book you pick up in the series, because they all connect, but they don't. So
Cool.
it's always like, oh, it's like that time when I wrestled a god. Like if you imagine me wrestling the god, you can imagine how scared I am now. But like if you knew the story, if you read the book where he did wrestle the god, then it means a whole lot. And if you
Yeah.
didn't read that story, it doesn't matter, because you can still imagine him wrestling a god, and now
Yeah.
he's in
Yeah.
this story, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
so he'll give you those hints that if you read that other book, then you remember that book. And if you didn't read it, it doesn't
It's not a big
matter.
deal. That's cool.
So like that's what I loved about his writing. But and so I've read a lot of his books because it's all about this. I can't even tell you what time it is, but it's weird magical stuff. It's like a post-apocalyptic, humans as we know them are not really humans, because it's an
Mm-hmm.
alien group who calls themselves humans, but they're not humans. So the humans that we're humans are like really seen as like nothing in comparison to this
Amazing. That
human
sounds
race that's not
really
humans.
cool.
So it's like
Yeah.
really cool stuff. But like I'm sure that he has a whole slew of fans that would have something to say about something about his writing, like because they would be so, like, or
Yeah.
like there's the ElfQuest cartoons that people were like real heavy on ElfQuest. And I got into ElfQuest a little bit back in the day, but like the way that people follow the lore of ElfQuest was like crazy. I couldn't get into the fandom like that. Like
That's
people get
what, yeah.
crazy about these
So
things,
invested.
and it has
Yeah.
to be so pure that it just is a little bit too
Yeah.
much. And I
Yeah.
think so fandom brings out the
It's
best and the worst in people.
I agree with you. And it's as you say, like when it has to be so pure, like there's something very like puritanical about like the way that some people engage with fandom. And I'm like just very against anything puritanical ever, really.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so and I think and I so I find it really exciting when people do things that aren't puritanical and subvert things and play with things. So I think that's really fun. And then yeah, I'm always a little bit wary of anyone that is like, this has to be this way and this has to stay like this. And you get it across like, there are people, and I did English literature with theatre, and I did it obviously like in England, and the university I went to, the University of Warwick, is like the nearest university to Shakespeare's hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon.
I was
So there
gonna
are a lot of
ask you if
links.
you've been, yeah.
Yeah, I've been a lot of times. And so there are a lot of links between our uni and the RSC there and Stratford and everything. And like there's a huge community of people that are like Shakespeare purists and hate the kind of reinvention of Shakespeare and want all Shakespeare performances to be like the tights and the ruffles. And I find that so funny, because I think that Shakespeare himself would not have wanted that. Like, Shakespeare saw theatre as this tool for reimagination, and this tool for sort of like understanding society in new and interesting ways. And so yeah, I think that like anything puritanical, particularly within fandom, alarms me a bit.
Yeah. I just as a side note, and then we have the last two questions, but I love the second home. when I went there, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so gorgeous. Like
It's beautiful.
I love,
Beautiful.
oh
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was,
Yeah.
oh,
Stratford's lovely. Yeah, it's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you ever get to that side of the world, go there and go to
Amazing.
his first home just to see where he grew, like was born, raised, whatever, but then go to his second home, and the
It's
recreation of what they did
yeah,
there is so gorgeous.
the second best bed.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
don't go to the third place because that's unnecessary. It's just his daughter's house, which is
Yeah.
unnecessary.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like, I don't know why that's on the tour. And it's all about her husband and his trade. So why?
Yeah.
I was like, really, this is unnecessary. But anyway, so how do we support your community?
I mean, just like read, I think so read the books, but really importantly, like I understand that not everybody is going to want to read young adult fiction and that not everybody is a fan of young adult fantasy. I think it's really important that as a society, we stop diminishing things liked by teenage girls. And I think like that's something that everyone should just do across the board, because I just think it's kind of misogynistic. You know, for some reason, there's like it's kind of like an old joke, but you know, people say like first come the gays, then come the girls, and then something's popular. And then that thing becomes like a source of ridicule. So boy bands, like teenage girls will, you know, be obsessed with a boy band, and there'll be like a brief period where that boy band is like, I don't know, I guess given like artistic credence. And then when too many teenage girls get into it, it's a teenage girl thing, and there's just this like mass devaluing of that cultural product. And I find that a little bit insidious. Like if something is important to a certain group of people and a certain group of people resonate with it, then we shouldn't diminish it and devalue it. And so I think everyone should just stop diminishing it things because they're liked by teenage girls, and stop diminishing things because they're liked by teenagers and young people in general, because children's literature, I don't even really have the words to say what I feel about children's literature, because it's just my great love. Like it's the thing that makes most people read. It's everyone is sort of taught literature at school, and often that puts people off it, and then they'll go away on their own in those years where they're not like paying rent or trying to like adult and all of the pressures that come with that, and you've got this like beautiful period of time where you're able to just like find out what you like and like use your imagination. And then for some reason we grow up and then we shit on it, like, and I find it so upsetting because, you know, the Chronicles of Narnia are, in my opinion, like one of the greatest works of literature ever.
Yes.
And like, why does it matter that it's for children? His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman, equally one of the best series. Mallory Blackman's Noughts and Crosses, an amazing series. So, and I think it's really important that like we don't think of those things as being less culturally valuable, less enlightening, less important just because they're for young people. Because if you give young people like a solid foundation of good literature and encourage them to read and think and explore things outside of their own experience, then you're like setting them up to become like really well-rounded people. And then they become, you know, adults and become decision makers and become people that will have influence the world. So that's how everyone can support the community. Like stop like looking down on books for kids.
And then unfortunately, my last question is, how do we support and follow you?
Thank you. So I'm at McLeod Mouth everywhere. So McLeod is my surname, MCLEOD _mouth. So like loudmouth, but McLeod Mouth. So that's how you can follow me, and I post updates about everything I'm doing and my work, and you can buy my book. I will show you a picture of it. This is my book. It's called Rapunzella or Don't Touch My Hair, and it came out in July, and it's available. If you're in the UK, it's in all bookstores, and if you're not in the UK, you can get it online.
Awesome. Thank you, Ella. This has
Thank
been
you so much. This has been so great.
an amazing conversation. And thank you everyone who's been listening, whether on YouTube, if you were watching, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. This has been an amazing episode of On Behalf of. If you enjoy, please consider subscribing, whether financially or just hitting that subscribe button. Everything makes a difference. And look forward to the next episode. Thank you.